Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the online premiere of Save the Yellowstone Grizzlies film, The Beast of Our Time, Climate Change and Grizzly Bears. It's great to have you all with us tonight. We appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate you taking the time to tune in from around the world to watch our film and learn about our efforts to save the grizzly bear. My name is Chuck Irestone, and I'm the marketing coordinator for Save the Yellowstone Grizzly, and I'm coming to you from smoky Missoula, Montana. Tonight we have a special program for you. You'll learn about how climate change is affecting grizzlies and what you can do to get involved. You'll hear from our founder and grizzly bear expert, Doug Peacock, and then from director Micah Middleton and assistant director Brad Orsted. Afterwards, we'll have a Q&A with some of the film participants. Their experience on the grizzly bear conservation issue adds up to over 300 years. So come up with some great questions, and you can submit your questions in the comment section on the Facebook and YouTube live streams. We'd like to take a moment, wherever you are, to acknowledge the Native peoples and tribal lands that you live on. The Native Americans in North America consider the grizzly bear sacred, and in 2016, over 200 tribes signed the Peacock Treaty, asking for Congress to pass the Tribal Heritage and Grizzly Bear Protection Act. We at Save the Yellowstone Grizzly believe Indigenous wisdom should lead the way to save the great bear. We have some shout outs and thank yous to our supporters this evening. We'd like to thank the sponsors of the film, Patagonia and the Sierra Club. And thanks for the continued support from Necessaire and 1% for the Planet. And a special thanks to Bonnie Rice and Sarah Pulowski of the Montana Sierra Club. Thanks to our Catch a Fire volunteers, Leisha Baldini, Nick Ido, Amy Wynn, Ashley Ringeman, and Molly Sleeper. And thanks to all our Facebook co-hosts this evening, Jeff Bridges, Bill Payne, Patagonia, Necessaire, Montana Sierra Club, Tom Mangelson, Earth Justice, Grizzly Times, the Humane Society of the United States Wildlife Protection Campaign, Ken Sanders Rare Books, Imagination Brewing, Buffalo Field Campaign, Bonfire Branding, Elk River Books, Ferguson Law, Wild Earth Guardians, Western Watersheds Project, Open Strum, Park County Environmental Council, the Center for Biological Diversity, Wilderness Watch, Wyoming Wildlife Advocates, and the Yak Valley Forest Council. And big thanks to John Guggenheim of the Musicians Saving Our Home Planet and all the musicians who played a virtual concert for us last night. You can find links to all these awesome co-hosts on the film page of our website. To kick things off, we have a special audio postcard from one of our biggest supporters, and we'd like to play that for you now.
Hello everyone, Jeff Bridges here. I want to welcome everyone to the screening of our film, The Beast of Our Time. I wish I could be there with you all. It's been a pleasure to work on this film with some of my oldest friends and grizzly experts, Doug Peacock and Dan Sullivan. You know, grizzlies are the keystone species of our ecosystem, and they're dispersing onto the landscape because of climate change. We must show these bears tolerance and give them room to roam, especially the explorer bears that are important to connectivity. Thanks everyone for supporting Doug's lifelong work and Save the Yellowstone Grizzly. Enjoy the film and join us in taking action for the grizzly. The Grizz abides. Can we?
A special thanks to Jeff for all his support over the years and lending his voice to the bear in our film. To show your support for the grizzly and Jeff's kindness, we can go to our website and get yourself the Grizz Abides sticker. We'd like to give a special thanks to Bill Payne for using his artistic talent to score the film. Bill stated in a recent Facebook post, "In framing my music against the dialogue and the visuals, I strove to convey a sense of hope, of wonder, and of reverence to where we find ourselves in the vital balance between man, climate, and beasts." Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about Save the Yellowstone Grizzly. In 2016, Doug Peacock founded the organization when the federal government decided to take the Yellowstone grizzly off the endangered species list and implement a trophy hunt. This spurred Doug into action, along with the fact that the government announced that climate change wouldn't have an effect on grizzlies now or in the future. And we all know that not to be true. As Doug has stated, climate change is the beast of our time. Save the Yellowstone's grizzly mission is to fight for the safety and welfare of all grizzlies south of Canada. Our goal is to establish a large-scale grizzly bear ecosystem and recovery zone with appropriate linkages ensuring the long-term viability of the bear in the face of the imminent effects of climate change. Save the Yellowstone grizzly needs your help. The grizzly bear, a keystone species, is in trouble due to climate change, and explorer bears are being killed at an alarming rate. The explorer bears, essential for connecting bear populations, are dispersing to the edge of their ecosystems looking for food. If we keep killing these explorer bears, we'll never have connectivity and reach the goal of removing the grizzly from the endangered species list. We must learn to coexist and allow grizzlies to explore the landscape. You can learn more about explorer bears on our website. It's going to take all of us working together to save the grizzly, so please join us by visiting our website, SaveTheYellowstoneGrizzly.org, and signing up for our newsletter, pitching in a few bucks, and signing our petition on change.org called Protect the Grizzly, Stop Killing and Harassing Explorer Bears. The petition is to Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland and President Biden, asking them to evaluate the effects of climate change on the bear and pass the Tribal Heritage and Grizzly Bear Protection Act. You can also text GRIZ, G-R-I-Z, to 6686 to sign up for our newsletter, and you'll automatically be sent a link to the petition. Montana truly is the last best place, but not without grizzly bears. Now I'd like to introduce our founder and board chair, Doug Peacock.
Andrea.
You're the show.
Okay,
Hey, ready
Chuck.
to go.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay,
so
I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Doug has been advocating for the grizzly bear for over 50 years. He did 2 tours of duty as a Green Beret medic in Vietnam. And after the war, he came back and was out of sorts and crawled into the wildest places he could find in the American West. And there he ran into grizzly bears. Those encounters changed Doug's life, and he vowed to protect them and give a voice to the voiceless. Edward Abbey also based his famous character, George Washington Hayduke, in the Monkey Wrench Gang on Doug. And if you go to our merchandise page on the website, you'll see we've honored Abby and Doug by creating a Hayduke Loves Grizz sticker, courtesy of Ken Sanders Bookstore. You can also learn more about Doug on his website at dougpeacock.net.
Well, Haydick didn't know he was going to live this long, you know, Chuck, and thank you for your work. I'd like to thank Bill Payne and Jeff Bridges. You guys, you've stood by us, me, for so damn long. I love you, okay? And Chuck is right. You know, the beast of our time is climate change. And the Yellowstone grizzly bear ecosystem will not survive without connectivity. Connectivity, you know, to ecosystems to the north, especially the one around Glacier Park and the Bob Marshall and the Rocky Mountain front. Grizzly bears are fleeing climate change as their co-dominant species, Homo sapiens, is starting to do. It's a threat to both of our fates. Our fates are commingled. We have a collective destiny. And I think we should go into this decade with that on our mind. I don't know if we're going to come through it. But if the grizzly bear comes through, Homo sapiens have a shot. And this is not stray conservation work. This is the work to save the endangered species of the earth. And eventually on that list, along with the grizzly bears, will be our own. And as Chuck stated, you know, we've got to facilitate the travel of bears that are fleeing ecosystems like Glacier and Yellowstone from climate change, trying to find new habitats. They got to do that because, you know, we don't know the future, but, forest fires and timbered areas often come back. It's grassland. The habitat is drastically altered. The carrying capacity is often reduced, and therefore animals need to go look for food elsewhere. They're going to cross pastures and ranches. They're going to cross highways and freeways, and we've got to help them do that. And what we need to do is quit killing them. And right now, the greatest threat to grizzly bears happens to be the federal agency, the Fish and Wildlife Service, that has been entrusted to recover that species, which is threatened on the Endangered Species Act. And they are not doing their job. And their job is to recover grizzlies. And what they are doing is they're using guidelines that are a quarter of a century old, from 1986, to kill basically any grizzly that gets out of his, national park. And this is not right. The grizzlies need to exist on the landscape anywhere they can survive. We human beings need to accommodate and tolerate their movements across their land. Grizzlies are quite tolerant of human beings. We need to return the favor. And so, Save the Yellowstone Grizzly has hired a law firm to look into suing the Federal Wildlife Service over using guidelines for killing grizzlies that are 25 years old at a time they actually dismissed global warming as, an issue for grizzly bears to think about. And, it's brutal and it's murderous, and we got to stop them. And I don't believe you can change the Federal Wildlife Service without going over their head to President Biden and Deb Haaland. And I'm going to write, I have written my own letters, and I encourage you to do your own. And the other thing is we've hired a law firm to look into filing a lawsuit. And if you want to contribute to our legal defense fund, Chuck will make that possible. But anyway, this is a grand time. I have house guests tonight that are going up to Tom Minor Basin at this moment to see grizzly bears who are already fleeing Yellowstone Park and, going to feed on areas that happen to be safe in terms of, tolerant ranchers and ranches, out of the park and looking for new habitat. So let's help those bears any way we can. And another project that I am partnering with Lance Craighead of the Craighead Institute is an existing underpass of I-90. And we just communicated by, writing a collective letter to Mayor Pete, as I call him. And, we're going to pursue that ranch. We've studied it, that route under I-90, which is the biggest barrier between Yellowstone and Glacier Park ecosystem. So thank you. Enjoy the film, and I'm available afterwards.
Thanks, Doug, for your wise and inspiring words, as always. Next, I'd like to introduce the director, Micah Middleton, and assistant director, Brad Orsted. Micah is the owner of Never Give Up Films and has worked with National Geographic, the Smithsonian, BBC, and Netflix. She's traveled the globe and has had filmed pumas in Patagonia, Amur tigers in the Russian Far East, and grizzlies in her backyard. And Brad Orsted is an award-winning wildlife photographer and conservation filmmaker. He's a podcaster and the author of the forthcoming book, Finding Marley, about loss and wilderness. Please welcome Brad and Micah.
Hey, everybody. Go ahead, Micah. Why don't you go first? She's on mute.
Sorry, technology. I want to say thank you to everyone that is here watching the film, supporting Save the Yellowstone Grizzly, and who have in the past supported Grizzlies, Save the Yellowstone Grizzly, and protecting our backyards. Because at the end of the day, Brad and I are phenomenally lucky, along with Doug and many of the participants in the film, and we have grizzly bears in our backyards, and we need your help to protect these phenomenal animals. And yeah, we hope that you enjoy the film, and I'll give it over to Brad.
Thank you, Micah. Yeah, I just wanted to thank Patagonia and really all of our sponsors. I'd also really like to thank our cast and crew. We could not have done it without all of you. I'd really like to thank Doug and Dan for trusting Micah and I to tell their 50-year in the making dire warning about grizzly bears and climate change. And I'd also like to thank every one of you for watching this and for getting involved and taking action and helping us to save these grizzlies. I do believe wholeheartedly that our fates are completely intertwined, that what happens to the grizzlies will eventually happen to all of us. So please enjoy the film.
Thanks, Brad and Micah. And as a reminder, everybody, you can submit your questions in the comments section on the Facebook and YouTube live streams. And we'd like to announce that we're also releasing the film on all our social media platforms on Monday, August 9th. Now it's time to sit back, relax, and enjoy our film, The Beast of Our Time, Climate Change and Grizzly Bears.
I thought of the wilderness we had left behind us, open to sea and sky, joyous in its plenitude and simplicity, perfect yet vulnerable, unaware of what is coming, defended by nothing, guarded by no one. Edward Abbey. This wild, magnificent land is known as the Yellowstone ecosystem, that vast region surrounding the nation's first national park. All the original animals who lived here before the coming of the white man are still here. For the tribes, the greatest of these was the grizzly bear. An early arriver to this beautiful green continent, eager for the garden that was emerging from the ice, land of forests and flowers, of blizzards and beauty, the grizzly bear walked alongside us down the Rocky Mountain front. We are at a crossroads. We now have the unholy power to decide the fate of other species. The grizzly bear's fate and ours are one. "50 years ago, grizzly bear advocate Doug Peacock sought to make a lasting record of their existence in the lower 48. Along with his best friend, author Terry Tempest Williams, they speak to the power and value of the wild.
We knew this was coming. We've been talking about this together, Doug, for 30 years. I'm surprised. I didn't think it would come this close. I didn't think we would be sent home, brought to our knees in this moment of reckoning and awakening. And I actually think it's a good thing. And I don't say that lightly. We almost lost my brother to COVID. He survived, but 200,000 people haven't. And we are not grieving them. We are not grieving the loss of species. We are not grieving the fires that are burning. We just go on as everything is fine.
And this is really the crucial time that we need our friendship. You know, we are passing the tipping point right now. We are just sampling the air from California and a little bit from the Pacific Northwest here in Montana. You know, the greatest threat to grizzlies in this Yellowstone ecosystem is climate change.
We are incapable of seeing ourselves as the problem. I think we are the problem, and that's why we have to learn how to live with grizzlies. That's why we have to learn how to live with with coyotes or drought or fire lapping at our door.
I would not care to live in a world where there are not grizzly bears. That would be the final depletion of everything I love, not just in my American West, where we are right now, but in the world. It's a final defeat of the wilderness here. It means the end of wilderness. It means that everything is unmistakably a human landscape.
You know, I still believe, especially now, that when we're all under siege with climate change, that we can connect with the heart of wildness and other species. So when I see a grizzly, I see the potential of who we really are. And I don't want to forget that. And I don't want our children and their children's children to forget that.
Climate change has obliterated the bear's most critical food source, the seeds from the white-bark pine cones. Rising temperatures allowed the deadly mountain pine beetle to destroy the alpine forests. The decimation of whitebark is just the first gust of the hot wind blowing across the Rocky Mountains. David Matson has worked for 35 years studying bears and mountain lions.
So where you are right here is in our backyard, which is along Seuss Creek, which flows down from the Absaroka Mountains. There's grizzly bears just a couple miles upstream. We don't have grizzly bears down here right now. Haven't seen them yet anyway. But this is emblematic of the kind of situation that more and more people are finding themselves in, where we humans have placed ourselves in the very best bear habitat, especially at lower elevations. So guaranteed, we're going to have a grizzly bear wander on down this creek, looking for food that we have here in great plenitude, like chokecherry, like buffalo berry, like serviceberry. So this is a rich environment, and that's where we are. So we need to be prepared, and we need to be willing to allow bears to come down here and do what they're going to do. We have grizzly bears being killed at probably 2 to 3 times the rate they were 20 years ago, which begs the question, why? And that goes back to climate change. Climate change, which is changing the world for all of us, but it's had a catastrophic effect on grizzly bears, or more specifically on grizzly bear-human relations. So what we've seen is a dramatic escalation in the numbers of bears dying because of conflicts over livestock and because of encounters with hunters. Climate change took out whitebark pine. Because climate change took out whitebark pine, it forced bears to look for alternate foods. The other alternative was meat, livestock, so cattle, sheep, or you can go to where humans are killing animals like elk. One of the key questions is, how do we find a relationship with bears to where we can coexist, bears and people can live in the same places at the same time? It doesn't take that much for us to create the kind of space where coexistence can happen. It takes a certain amount of prudence. It's like me maybe being smarter than my dog. Grizzly bears really don't have that much trouble accommodating humans. Grizzly bears can live with us just fine.
When grizzlies leave their sanctuaries in national parks, they must pass through ranches and other private property. Climate change has driven this migration. They're looking for new sources of food. Encounters with livestock tend to result in dead bears, but they don't have to.
I get extremely emotional about this because, like Doug and like my family, we are amongst the bears every day. And it is not a situation of reading about it and feeling deeply connected. It is being deeply connected. And what we used to be was the bad guy, and we still are to some degree. But we have an incredible capacity to become the good guy.
Just north of Yellowstone Park, a number of ranchers have provided an accommodation for this migration of bears. One of these ranches is run by 3 generations of the Anderson family.
We have bears. We have lots of bears, lots of wolves, a couple foxes, and a couple coyotes. Coyotes.
We've grown, I feel, and I say that with a lot of humility because I think there's a tremendous amount to learn about how to effectively, coexist with the grizzlies. I think our biggest learning curve occurred with the wolf reintroduction, and we were pressed hard to explore different sorts of strategies on how to really manage our domestic animals more effectively.
It's fair to say that there are some places on the landscape that might not be great for cattle, and we're aware of that, and we're just always observing and looking at the changes. And it allows us to look at community in a different way. It's not just ranchers and livestock. It's a really large system already at work that we're really enjoying being a part of.
I'm sad to say, or I just believe that most of what humans do and the design of our systems is not a win-win at all. It's a win-lose, and we've got to find a win-win. And to do that, we've got to think first of the landscape and then figure out how to make it work for us, rather than picking up the pieces later and trying to rationalize our way through it.
I to be honest, don't look at the grizzly bear any different than I look at any other wildlife on this place. It certainly has a magic to it, but I think that everything has the same sort of magic, and we also have that. And so it's just a great place to watch them and learn from them and remember that they have survived and they're resilient through adaptability and just being able to change with the times. They're the ultimate teacher of change.
What might appear to be a small little deal in the world, in the ecological system, it might be huge.
The science is clear on the effect of climate change on the greater Yellowstone ecosystem's carrying capacity for grizzly bears. Leading expert on the outbreak dynamics of pine beetles, Jesse Logan was the project leader for the U.S. Forest Service and now studies the collapse of whitebark pine, one of the Yellowstone grizzlies' prime foods.
When we predicted and published in the scientific literature what we expected to happen with global warming and whitebark pine, it's really one of the early examples, maybe the first example of an ecological prediction well in advance of something that played out almost exactly as our models had predicted. What we saw was essentially a complete collapse of whitebark pine forests. But one thing that was different, it happened faster than we had anticipated. And the thing about whitebark that was really a valuable food resource is it kept them up in the high country, away from people. Wow, grizzly claw marks. These claw marks are evidence of grizzlies down here low. It's becoming more and more common, in fact, really common this time of year in the fall when they would have been up in the high country to be down in this low country, looking for other food resources, biscuit root, things like that.
What do we tell our grandkids? That we sat idly by while the last of the grizzlies vanished? As bears adapt, moving from wild to rural landscapes, we need to learn to coexist. Louisa Wilcox has been a fierce advocate for the Yellowstone grizzlies for 3 decades, challenging trophy hunting, challenging delisting from the endangered species list, and keeping a broad watch on the lives of bears.
Under my desk is a huge box of 400 records of grizzly bear deaths in Yellowstone. In it are a number of stories that tell a lot about how grizzly bears are dying, about carelessness and thoughtlessness and people being unprepared to be in grizzly bear country. There are some dead bear stories that are tragic. One day, this bear found itself in the wrong place at the wrong time. When a hunter hunting alone, afraid, at dusk, armed, with no bear spray, encountered this bear. And he shot and killed it. Some of the most important and wonderful voices for the grizzly bear are tribal people. 270 tribes and traditional societies signed a treaty opposed to trophy hunting grizzly bears. And when you look at trying to connect grizzly bear populations that have been long isolated in the Northern Rockies, to connect those populations to each other, and you look at the lands the tribes either own or have legal claim to, you suddenly get a picture of possibility, that the tribes have a key that is critical to the grizzly bear's future.
Yellowstone grizzlies are threatened with extinction. They are cut off from vital genetic diversity. We must allow them to reunite with their counterparts in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem if any of them are to survive. Author Rick Bass is a passionate defender of all things wild. He has lived for 34 years with the last remnant of the grizzlies of the Northern Rockies in the Yak River Valley.
I live up the very northwest part of the state, and Yellowstone's grizzlies are trying to get back to the Yak. They were there once, an unbroken stream of grizzlies moving from one mountaintop to the next, raising a family on one mountain, the young going to the next mountain, raising her family there, hopscotching from one mountain to the next, down to Yellowstone and back. It's really hard to be a grizzly right now. I mean, we've got trails going through their little meadows up in the Yak. We've got mines down in the Cabinet Mountains. We've got, Gallatin County subdivision and road building going around Yellowstone. We've got industrial recreation. We've got white bark pine extinction. And yet they're still here. I mean, they're still trying to connect those 5 little gardens where they are. They're still trying to grow back to reclaim, what was once their nation. To have only 25 left in the Yak, they are called the walking dead. I don't want to see them vanish. The judge who ruled twice for the Yellowstone grizzlies, saying we can't hunt them, the judge had a very simple question for the government. If you shoot bears when they come out of Yellowstone, how are they going to get to the Yak? They're not, are they?
So long as people aren't shooting at them, a grizzly bear can live for a long time. Imagine what they see and do in 30, 40 years. The country they cover, the country they claim. Not with our ownership notions of maps and deeds, borders and boundaries, but claiming instead with lives constructed of dignity, grace, and no small amount of joy. They love it even more than we do, if that's even possible. As a young grizzly bear researcher in Yellowstone Park, Barry Gilbert was severely mauled by a mother grizzly. Instead of blaming the bear, he devoted his career to studying and defending the species.
Yeah, what was surprising about that analysis of the white bark pine seeds was what a perfect food it was. You and I have known that Clark's nutcrackers can subsist almost completely on it, but when I saw that the analysis showed all of the essential amino acids were in white bark pine seeds, and that was over 50% fat, which is exactly what grizzly bears need. I thought, man, the loss of the white bark pine is really a big hit, and any of the 1,000 other things they eat, none of them compares with the importance of that.
Not only is it this beautiful food resource, but the red squirrel collects all the cones, brings them down from the trees, puts them in middens,
Right.
and then the grizz comes along and just scoops them up. The squirrel does all the work.
Right.
And a red squirrel is absolutely no threat to a grizzly.
Right. The numbers need to be built up more. You got isolated populations in the northern continental divide, and then west of that, the Yak only has 25 bears.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it's cut off from the Selkirks in BC, and then you have Yellowstone. So if we don't connect them, we're going to see genetic change. And also one thing that I've never heard anybody talk about is if you keep shooting the explorers that are going out to new habitat, what happens to the population? I think it's a misinterpretation to say we got so many bears now that they're exploding out of the park. Dave Matson has pointed out that this is consistent with decreased food base, therefore less density for them to sustain themselves.
Right.
So the ones that can't get enough food are going outside the park.
Just so critical to get that connection, that genetic exchange. Right. And to do that, it's up to us to learn to live with bears.
People start tolerating them, and then we get some pathways that go under highways, then we'll probably be in better shape.
Cubs stay with their mothers for nearly 3 years. She teaches them where to go when the berries are ripe, how to deal with wolves and wasps, how to avoid people and cars. Filmmaker Brad Orsted followed one such family for years.
In 2015, I was following a couple grizzly bear cubs with their mom. She was shot in the back of a basin by a hunter for standing up to move that's not aggressive. And we thought those cubs were doomed. There was no way they were going to make it through a Montana winter. And lo and behold, summer of 2016, those cubs came out by themselves. So they fought to survive. It was with great, great honor and pleasure that I'd get up in the morning and race down there to find the orphans. And those little orphans had that fight and that drive. They had to do it by themselves. They didn't have all of the lessons that their mom had taught them yet. They wandered out of the safety and sanctuary of the basin where they had spent their whole lives and came across a community that was ill-prepared and not tolerant of grizzly bears moving through. And the state killed both of those bears after I'd followed them for days and days and days. And it broke my heart. It almost broke me. It almost broke me.
Native people, we didn't grow up with mirrors. Like my ancestors 200 years ago, my great-great-grandmothers didn't have mirrors. What they had around them was the landscape, were the animals looking back at them to look at, and they were reflected back to themselves in this beauty, in this country, in this wildness, in this landscape. So our dances and our stories, they were about what we saw. And we saw bears and elk and mountain lions and minks, and that's how we saw ourselves.
Cindy Furman is a poet, author, and co-editor of Native Voices, a collection of poetry and prose.
The grizzly bear, who is slowly disappearing from this land, is not being represented, is not being counted, is being forgotten as something that used to exist here that doesn't exist anymore. That is part of a historical past, but not important to the ecosystem. When we finally make the decision to save these places, to save the black bear and the bull trout and the salmon, to undam our rivers, to save the Yellowstone grizzly, we will ultimately be saving ourselves. So when we think about the West, when we think about this continent that we're on that we call North America now, we have to start seeing ourselves as part of this very delicate ecosystem that is hurting right now, and realize that that it can't hold us forever if we don't start giving something back.
The survival of the species depends on crossing barriers like freeways and railroads. It also requires a measure of human understanding and tolerance. Leading the freeway crossing effort is Lance Craighead of the famous Craighead family, pioneers of modern grizzly bear biology.
I've been working with Doug Peacock and Save the Yellowstone Grizzlies on trying to get grizzlies across I-90 out of Yellowstone to areas further north. And this will be more and more of a pressing need with climate change as animals need to move across the landscape to find better living conditions.
It's absolutely critical bears be able to pass from one mountain range to the next, even if they're island ranges. You know, Yellowstone's an island ecosystem. There are grizzlies at the north end of those mountains right there. A culture like ours loves to build power lines and pipelines and freeways, absolute barriers to migration.
And you can improve an existing bridge or underpass for a couple $100,000. So it's really cost effective. Just put some fencing in there, could do a little landscaping, and it's already pretty nice for animals, but it's noisy and they can still get scared and run up on the highway.
Maybe we can pipe bear-friendly music, you know, to the freeway, under the freeway there, and you know, have a little solo Bach or something, you know.
If I was a bear, I could see that butte and I could smell it if the wind was right, and it looks like a nice place to go to.
The grizzly is our ally in our defense of our shared wilderness home. They're calling out a warning by example. Climate change knows no boundaries, spares no life. If we shun their warning, the consequences will be severe. We know what we have to do. The grizzly's fate and ours are one.
We hope you all enjoyed the film, and now we'll start our Q&A, and I'll slowly going to add folks in here. With us, we have our founder of Save the Yellowstone Grizzly, Doug Peacock, and author and Yak Valley advocate, Rick Bass. In here. Rick.
Hi, Rick.
Rick. Hi, Rick. And from grizzlytimes.org, we have wildlife biologist Dr. David Matson and grizzly advocate Louisa Wilcox.
You're muted, Chuck.
I'm muted.
I can hear you, Chuck.
Okay. Then we have
hey, Dougie.
We have grizzly bear biologist and author of a new book, One of Us, Dr. Barry Gilbert, and white bark pine specialist, Dr. Jesse Logan.
Barry, yeah.
We have poet and author Cindy Furman with us.
Hi, y'all.
Hi, Barry. Hi, Cindy.
Cindy.
You're so beautiful. Damn.
And we have
Great film. Great
assistant
film.
director and our director with us. And Malou Anderson is with us also.
Oh, wonderful.
Hi, Malou.
So great. Oh my
What am I
God.
forgetting?
You've got a great cast. Chuck, don't blow it.
And see, Jesse, you might want to reconnect. We don't have you with us. Okay, let's see. We got some questions here. So Don White Jr. From YouTube asks, how does one distinguish between naturally dispersing grizzlies and grizzlies moving to escape climate change?
Barry, I would like to hear from you.
Well, I don't think there's a whole much of distinction.
Yeah, me too.
Grizzly bears need to disperse, and we should facilitate anything that the explorer bears do. It's a matter of tolerance on our part.
Yes.
Okay. From YouTube, Kurt Holtzen asks, what conflict mitigation tools are being used to mitigate livestock bear depredation?
Chuck, just repeat that. That's so important.
What conflict mitigation tools are being used to mitigate livestock bear depredation?
Okay, I'll answer that. You would have to go back to the 25-year-old grizzly guidelines that were provided by the interagency grizzly team in 1986. And they are archaic and punitive in virtually all conflicts with livestock, especially if they're repeat. You know, one time and you might get a warning, you might get relocated, twice dead. But it is archaic and awful, and it's resulting in every grizzly that moves out of the ecosystem trying to be an explorer bear, like a grizzly bear and big snowies, because they had questionable evidence, I think, that the grizzly bear was involved in 2 livestock eatings or deprecations. We don't really know, but they killed that bear. That bear was halfway to the Charlie Russell on the Missouri River. That is an explorer bear already have to move to an unoccupied habitat for grizzly bears with the American Prairie Reserve and the Charlie Russell. That is criminal. And so what I'm saying is their guidelines are corrupt.
I can answer a couple actual techniques that are being used on the land right now from ranchers.
Sure.
that work for us for the most part.
Yeah.
One of them is just better herd management all around. So understanding and keeping a better pulse on cattle in wild places. And we can do that by keeping them bunched more in bigger groups together, like bison moms, helping them rekindle that herd instinct that they have inside of them already. We can also use electric fence and flagery around calving grounds that work really well. We have a 100% success rate with our flagery. And then lastly, one that really works well for us in wild places when we're ranching is to better manage our cattle grazing plans around hyperphagia, meaning that we can remove cattle from the most, the places that they can get depredated on the most, which are in the timber and the large areas, usually public land allotments. But if we are really responsible with a good grazing plan and a regenerative agriculture system, then we can move our cattle closer to headquarters when bears are going through hyperphagia, which is most often the time they kill livestock. That works really well for us. And then, of course, using new tech. So,
yeah, Malou's techniques are applicable to all these conflict areas, and the responsible state and federal agencies need to push it on the ranchers to adopt the Andersons, remarkable success.
Thanks, Malou. And we have another question from Philip Tansky, and he asks, I would be curious about state wildlife reform around predator and non-game management, given that state agencies historically haven't been tolerant of grizzlies or other large carnivores, or taken to tribal perspectives or the broader public. Louisa, you want to go for that one?
Yeah, Philippe, great question, huge problem. The problem with the states and the response to a lot of carnivore situation, wolves and bears, I really want to say first is not personal. There's some great people on the ground. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, for example, has some of the best in the business. The problem comes with how the institutions themselves are placed in the context of grizzly bear management, have developed, which is not exactly what Aldo Leopold, for example, dreamt of when he was involved in the creation of the current state wildlife system 100 years ago. Right now, the real issue is that the states, no matter where you are, but it really shows up as a problem in grizzly bear country, are largely funded by hunters, hunter licenses, taxes on ammunitions and gun ammunition, and that kind of thing, and also general fund money, but also a lot of, so the people with the seat at the table in making decisions about what they do have a strong agricultural bias and hunter bias, even though when you look at regions like Greater Yellowstone and throughout the Northern Rockies, you've got a vast majority of people who come here are not dependent, are not hunters necessarily or involved in agriculture. They are not paying, so they don't have a meaningful seat at the table, bird watchers, backpackers, and the like. And in my view, they need to pay. We need to actually reform the state system so that folks who enjoy our wildlife, who come to Yellowstone Park, pony up, whether it's taxes on binoculars or backpacks or what have you. It's really time. And that will, if we accomplish that, reform what states do. And there's a new group, David and I are involved in it, called Wildlife for All. It's out in New Mexico, but it's trying to coordinate a national effort to reform state wildlife management. And I think it's time for a national fund as well that could help what the states do in terms of biodiversity conservation, because the need is immense. And the way these institutions were developed has a very narrow view on what wildlife is. That having been said, if you want to see successful coexistence on the ground, the state folks are doing it. It's just many of them don't have a lot of support at the top, the top politicians and the like. So.
Great. Thank you, Louisa. We have a question from Facebook from Tom Whitney, and he says, great video. I was recently involved in a grizzly bear attack in Island Park, Idaho last month. It was a sow with a cub. I strongly oppose any possible consequences to that bear. What is the best course of action for me, this organization and this bear?
You know, I've been charged 36 times by mother grizzlies with young. My technique for survival, because a couple of those grizzlies came within 10 feet and skidded to a stop. The last one I encountered came over and nursed her cub next to my daughter and I in Yellowstone Park at 15 feet away. So listen, you know, a mother grizzly, even charging with a young, is still deciding what to do, whether to conclude that charge. All you've got to be is not a threat to that cub or yearling. That's all you got to be. And to do that, you know, my idiot solutions are simple. Don't move. I turn my head to the side because, you know, looking at a grizzly can be a confrontational posture. I don't yell. I don't scream. That has precipitated grizzly bear charges. I never use bear spray during the day because I know I can get out of every close grizzly bear, you know, confrontation. And so never run. Forget about climbing a tree. You'll dead if you do that kind of stuff. People who have forgotten the rules and have spooked and tried to run and got hit by a grizzly bear and chewed on have stopped the attack and the biting by just playing dead. I mean, it's still sound advice. And, you know, the government sucks on this issue. They're so total bad. The national park, Yellowstone, Glacier, you know, the Montana State Game and Fish and Wyoming, they're not giving you the most accurate information. Do not be a threat to their young and you'll get off every time so far.
All right, great. Thanks, Doug. And here's one for Cindy. Could you talk about your thoughts on the value of Indigenous knowledge in combating climate change and protecting grizzlies? And could you expand upon the relationship between Native peoples and grizzly bears?
Thank you. Yes, I think I touched on that quite a bit in the film about how grizzly bears and the environment in general have always influenced Native tradition, Native thoughts, Native knowledge. And losing that, just like losing Native people, we lose a great deal of history. We lose a connection to place that will leave a gap for the rest of us to fall in. And I think that's the biggest risk we have. I also, and this might be going off of the question a little bit, but Native people don't necessarily look for transactional relationships as Euro-Americans do, where I give you something, I get something back. We're looking for a transformational relationship, and our relationship with the environment was about transformation of ourselves, of place, of our culture. It wasn't about, if this doesn't offer me something, then it's not worth saving, because everything did offer us and does offer us something into our culture now. So I think that those ways of thinking, bound with the traditional ecological knowledge, can inform how we move forward. And in restoring these places, we can start to restory them. We can create new stories that help us move forward and help us live with these animals and in this place as we always have.
Thank you, Cindy. Another Facebook message from Meredith. Is anything being done to limit open range grazing of cattle in grizzly territory?
Anybody want to step up? As far as I know, as given the example of the Upper Green River near Pinedale, you know, the Forest Service just opened up public lands to cattle grazing in anticipation of the livestock's conflicts with grizzly bears. The Federal Wildlife Service, once again, let's see, they authorized 70 taking permits. I mean, 70 killed grizzly, anticipating the conflict with livestock. So, you know, those are public lands. We know, you know, from Malou that it's possible to run your cows in some kind of an equilibrium with sustainability. And why are we permitting, you know, both the state of Wyoming, who is murderous on grizzly bears, they don't want a single grizzly bear in the Wind River range. And there are emails that prove this, you know, kind of, clandestine emails with Chris Servine, who was, you know, head of the interagency grizzly bear committee for decades. This is a huge fucking, oops,
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. Thanks, Doug. I mean, I guess the geezer that I am on this issue, I kind of look at this issue from a historical perspective. And actually, there have been really pretty significant gains in some areas where, particularly in Greater Yellowstone, where the ecosystem on the national forests outside the parks were just full of domestic sheep. And they were the great mortality sinks, you know, where grizzlies walked into and never left because grizzlies can't resist sheep and the herders are always armed. And it was just an ongoing kind of bloodbath. And what the Forest Service did, the Targhee and the Gallatin in particular, but also the Shoshone, to some extent, they over time, it was a time, this was during the mid 80s, at the downturn of the sheep grazing industry on public lands, the Forest Service took advantage of that and offered non-grizzly bear habitat opportunities for some of these ranchers to move to, and some of them took them up on it, and others just got out of the business because it was so expensive and the economics weren't in their favor. So now, at least in the grizzly bear recovery zone, which doesn't mean that much to grizzly bears anymore, but at least it's the core of it, there are no domestic sheep grazing, and that has removed at least one cause of mortality. Of course, climate change on the other side, contemporaneously now, is adding to the problem. But the Forest Service also had a record, and it does this with groups like Defenders of Wildlife, National Wildlife Federation, of buying out Forest Service grazing allotments, of course, where the ranchers want to get out. So there is some history here in looking at some of the really high conflict areas where there are no cows anymore. Because, I mean, Doug raises a good point about the Upper Green, but other areas like Black Rock Spread Creek on the Bridger Teton is closed. And that's a step forward. But, you know, where ranchers are of course willing, you know, to make a deal, you know, with the government. So.
All right, thanks, Louisa.
I think Louisa's right on track here with the Forest Service putting grazing sheep, cattle over grizzly bear survival. And the Upper Green River is a classic example of bad land management.
All right, I think we have time for one more, and it's from Facebook, Paulette Zyke Addy. How hopeful are you that we can accomplish this connection of grizzly areas for them to intermingle and keep the genetic pool diverse?
Wait a minute.
Are you trying to say something, Doug? Oh.
Is this from Paulette?
Yes.
Paulette, okay. I'm just reading it here. How hopeful are you? Yeah, anyway, Lance Craighead and I started, you know, this project 2 or 3 years ago. We found an underpass east of Livingston where grizzly bears were on a quarter-mile south of I-90 and anecdotally rumored to be on the north side of this existing underpass of a creek, which would lead into the Crazy Mountain. And so we put 3 years into this, and we had trail cams up, you know, for a year and a half, and and we got an incredible amount of data. We had 2 full-time employees who were financed by, oh my God, my friend at, anyway, I got a friend, financed the expense of 2 field workers for a year and a half, and they completed surveys, interviews. It's so optimistic. Anecdotally, we've got grizzlies passing under this underpass. Trail cams show black bears and mountain lions and stuff like that crossing with some regularity. And we're going to push this. Lance and I just wrote a letter to Secretary of Transportation, Pete, and we're going to try to get him to complete our project. We can complete it ourselves. This is cheap. We're talking about an underpass, getting animals under or over freeways for, a couple $100,000, or maybe a few more, but not, millions, would complete this project. And so it's quite pragmatic, and we're in communication, and we're just going to push it. I'm going to push it this week. I'm going to write a follow-up letter to Mayor Pete and such. We're on our way.
All right, thanks, Doug, and thanks everybody for participating in the Q&A. Final words from anybody?
Yeah, I want to say that actually the comments of the folks on this panel give me hope. I mean, Malou and the example of what the Andersons are doing and the neighbors is really inspiring and impressive. Barry's commitment for a long, long time, Barry actually kind of educated me when I first got into this. Cindy's remarks about the transformational power of landscape and bear, I think are all really key to the future of the bear. And I guess one landscape that gives me hope, but I think it's really relevant, is Romania, a country, a very poor European country with a grizzly bear, Ursus arctos, same as species as ours, with 7,000 bears with a human density that is like Appalachia in the eastern United States, that get along pretty damn well. And what climate change is basically asking us to do is share more land with more bears, have them in more places. And Romania, which many people couldn't imagine could have so many bears living cheek by jowl with so many people, including sheep herders, have really a lot to teach us. To Cindy's point, the cultural connection with bears in Romania was never broken. Unfortunately, with what we Europeans did here, we kind of broke our connection with the bear, and I think the tribal people can help us, mend that. So thank you.
Rick Bass has been in Romania, has written eloquently on that situation.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, thanks everybody. Hey, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. And if you didn't get to your question or comment, we'll reply directly on our Facebook and YouTube channel. Have a great evening, everyone. And for the Grizz, I'm Chuck Irestone.